The rain did not fall so much as it wept, a slow, gray drizzle that blurred the world outside the car window into a watercolor of misery. Elara sat in the back seat, her small hands clenched into fists in the lap of her best dress, a faded, hand-me-down floral print that suddenly felt like a costume for a play that had been cancelled. Her mother, Lillian, was a rigid silhouette in the driver's seat, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, her jaw set in a line of grim finality. They had just left the lawyer's office. The air in the car was thick enough to choke on, saturated with the scent of wet wool and shattered dreams. The reading of her grandfather's will had been a swift surgical procedure conducted in a room that smelled of old money and older prejudice. The Vance family, her mother's family, was one of old Boston blood, their name etched on university buildings and hospital wings. Elara had only met her grandfather a handful of times, a towering, cold man whose gaze had always made her feel like a specimen under glass. Her mother had married for love, a handsome, kind-hearted mechanic who had nothing to offer but his devotion. For this sin of following her heart, Lillian had been cast out, her name spoken only in whispers, a cautionary tale of wasted potential. The lawyer's voice had been dry and precise, a scalpel dissecting their last hope. The vast Vance fortune, the trusts, the properties, the stock portfolios was to be divided amongst Lillian's brothers. Their children, Elara's cousins, were each granted generous trust funds, college educations at Ivy League schools, and a guaranteed place in the family business. Then the lawyer's eyes had flickered to Lillian, a flicker of something that might have been pity but felt more like disdain. And to my daughter, Lillian, he had read, the words echoing in the tomb-like silence, who chose a path contrary to the family's interests and standing, I bequeath the sum of $10,000. He paused, letting the insult of the amount settle like dust. And to her daughter, Elara, I leave nothing. It is the wish of the deceased that no resource of this family be expended on one who carries the name of a stranger and is not of our legacy, not of our legacy. The words were a brand, searing themselves onto Elara's 11-year-old soul. She had watched her mother's face, had seen the last vestige of hope die in her eyes, replaced by a humiliation so profound it seemed to physically shrink her. They had walked out of that office under the weight of their relatives' stares, not of sympathy, but of cold validation. They were unworthy. They were nothing. That night, in their small, rented apartment that now felt like a hovel, Elara found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, the single check for $10,000 lying before her like a dead thing. Lillian wasn't crying. She was just staring into the middle distance, her spirit broken. Why, Mama? Elara had whispered, her voice small in the overwhelming quiet. Why don't they love us? Lillian had turned to her, her eyes pools of a deep, ancient hurt. Because, my darling, she said, her voice raspy with unshed tears, in their world, love is a transaction. We had nothing to offer them, no social advantage, no name to elevate theirs. We were, and poor investment. She reached out and touched Elara's cheek, her thumb stroking away a tear Elara hadn't even felt fall. Remember this feeling, Elara. Remember what it is to be looked at as if you are nothing, and promise me you will never, ever need them for anything. Elara nodded, the motion fierce, a vow etched into her bones. The rain continued to weep against the window, and in the heart of the little girl, something soft and trusting withered and died. In its place, a seed was planted, a dark, hard seed of resolve. The fall was not just from grace, it was an expulsion from the very concept of family, and the silence that followed was the beginning of everything. The years that followed were a study in gray. The $10,000 was swallowed whole by debts, a life raft with a slow leak. Lillian worked 2, then 3 jobs, her beauty fading under the relentless grind, her laughter becoming a ghost of a memory. Their life was a cycle of scrimping and saving, of patched clothes and utility shut-off notices, the ever-present specter of poverty a constant, unwelcome guest in their home. Lara became a ghost at school, while her cousins, whose faces she saw sometimes in the society pages of the newspaper she used to line the pantry shelves, were photographed at debutante balls and summered on Martha's Vineyard. She buried herself in books. The library became her sanctuary, her fortress. It was warm, it was free, and within its silent halls, knowledge was the one currency her family could not devalue. She didn't read for escape, she read for ammunition. She devoured books on economics, on computer science, on the stories of self-made titans who had built empires from nothing. Every slight, every hungry night, every pitying look from a guidance counselor who suggested she learn a practical trade was another log on the fire of her determination. She saw her mother slowly dim, like a lamp running out of oil. Lillian never complained, but the light in her eyes, the light that had once fallen in love with a mechanic, guttered and died. She became a shell, going through the motions of survival. The day Lara graduated high school, valedictorian with a full scholarship to a state university her family would have sneered at, her mother hugged her, a brittle, fragile thing. "Make it mean something, Ellie," she whispered, her voice paper-thin. "Make all this mean something. University was just a different kind of battle." She worked nights as a waitress, coding on a second-hand laptop in the lulls between tables. She existed on coffee and a fury so focused it was almost a spiritual practice. While her peers partied, she built her first startup, a clumsy, failed app that taught her more about failure than any success ever could. She didn't mind. Failure was a lesson. Poverty was a motivator. The memory of her grandfather's disinheritance was the whip at her back. The true abyss, the moment that nearly broke her, came in her second year of university. A call from a hospital. Her mother, Lillian, had collapsed at work. It was advanced, inoperable cancer. The years of stress, of silent suffering, of going without to ensure Lara had just enough, had exacted their final price. Lara sat by her mother's bedside in the stark, sterile room, holding her thin, work-roughened hand. Lillian's eyes, once so bright, were sunken and tired. "I'm so sorry, Mama," Lara choked out, the tears she had held back for a decade finally breaking free. "I'm so sorry I couldn't give you a better life." Lillian turned her head, a faint, sad smile on her lips. "You were my better life, Ellie. You are my legacy. Now," she said, her voice a faint whisper, "go be a ghost in their machine. Haunt them with the life you build." She died that night, taking the last of Lara's childhood with her. The grief was a black hole, threatening to consume her. She was utterly alone. The family that had discarded her was thriving, oblivious, their lives a continuous celebration of their own superiority. For a week, Lara didn't leave her tiny dorm room. The darkness was complete. But then, she remembered her mother's final words. "Haunt them." She stood before her cracked mirror, her reflection pale and haunted. The grief was still there, a vast ocean inside her, but on its surface, a new, cold current began to flow. The pain was no longer something to be endured. It was a raw material. The love for her mother and the searing hatred for the family that had broken her were now fused into a single, unbreakable purpose. She would not just survive, she would ascend. She would build something so grand, so powerful, so undeniably successful that the Vances would have no choice but to see it. They would watch her rise from the world they had thrown her into, and they would do so in utter, powerless silence. The abyss had shown her its depth, and she had used it to lay a new foundation. The next 11 years were a silent, relentless campaign waged in the digital trenches. Lara vanished from the world that knew her. She became a phantom, her existence traceable only through a series of increasingly brilliant and disruptive tech companies. She shed her last name, becoming simply Lara. Her first success was a data analytics firm that she sold for enough money to never work again. But she wasn't done. The money was not the goal. It was merely fuel. She founded Ethelgard, a company focused on sustainable energy and AI-driven resource management. It was a field her old money family, with their investments in fossil fuels and traditional manufacturing, would have considered frivolous, a playground for hippies and dreamers. She worked with a quiet, terrifying intensity. Her office was a minimalist space high above the city, a world away from the dusty, wood-paneled opulence of the Vance family offices. She hired based on talent, not pedigree, building a team of brilliant outsiders who, like her, had something to prove. She never spoke of her past. She was a sphinx, her emotions locked behind a calm, unreadable facade. But every business decision was a subtle, calculated move in a chess game her opponents didn't even know they were playing. She studied the Vance holdings, not with anger, but with the cold eye of a strategist. She identified their weaknesses, their reliance on dying industries, their arrogance that blinded them to coming shifts in the global market. Her rise was meteoric but quiet. She avoided the spotlight, giving no interviews, appearing at no galas. Ethelgard became a whispered name in financial circles, a mysterious, unstoppable force. She used her wealth not for mansions or yachts, but to acquire strategic stakes in companies that were vital, often competing, to the Vance empire. She was a ghost in their machine, just as her mother had said. A silent, accumulating pressure on the foundations of their world. She learned that one of her cousins, the one who had been given a vice presidency straight out of Harvard, was running the Vance's flagship manufacturing division into the ground through incompetence and entitlement. She didn't gloat. She simply bought up the company's debt piece by piece through anonymous shell corporations. She lived a life of stark contrast. In her penthouse, all clean lines and silence, there was only one personal artifact. A faded photograph of her mother, Lillian, smiling, taken before the world had broken her. It was her altar, her reminder. This was not for her. This was for the woman in the photograph. This was for the little girl in the hand-me-down dress who had been told she was nothing. The final piece of her plan fell into place when she learned the Vance family, in a desperate bid to modernize and save their floundering empire, was seeking a major tech partner for a legacy transformation. It was the buzzword-laden plea of a dying dynasty. The board had drawn up a short list of potential partners. Through a series of ruthless, brilliant maneuvers, Lara ensured Ethelgard was not just on the list, but was the only viable candidate. The Vances, in their arrogance, never thought to look too deeply into the company's reclusive founder. They saw only the solution to their problems, the cutting-edge technology that could save them. They had no idea they were inviting the architect of their reckoning into their boardroom. The rise was complete. The ghost was now ready to speak. The Vance International boardroom was a temple to a bygone era. A massive obsidian table reflected the dour faces of the family members seated around it. Heavy velvet drapes were drawn against the Boston sun, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors looked down from the dark-paneled walls. The air was thick with the scent of lemon polish and slow-burning panic. The family business was bleeding money. Their stock was plummeting. The legacy transformation was their last hope. Lara entered alone. She wore a simple, exquisitely tailored black suit, its starkness a silent rebellion against the room's oppressive grandeur. In her hand, she carried a thin tablet. Her hair was pulled back, revealing a face that was no longer that of a wounded girl, but of a sovereign. She was calm, her movements economical, her gaze clear and direct. She took the seat at the head of the table, the one reserved for their CEO, her Uncle Charles, the man who had stood by and said nothing as his father disinherited her mother. He was older now, his jowls heavy with worry and privilege. Her other uncle, Robert, sat to his right, and scattered around the table were her cousins, the trust fund beneficiaries, their faces a mixture of boredom and anxiety. They looked at her, this enigmatic savior from Ethelgard, with a deference they reserved only for those who held the keys to their survival. They did not recognize her. The 11-year-old girl had been erased, replaced by this formidable, unreadable woman. For the first hour, she was all business. She walked them through the Ethelgard proposal, her voice cool, her analysis razor-sharp. She spoke of market fluxes, AI integration, sustainable pivots. She laid out a future for their company that was brilliant, logical, and necessary. They listened, captivated, nodding like eager schoolchildren. She was offering them a lifeline, and they were clutching at it with both hands. Then she paused. She placed her tablet on the table and leaned forward, her hands steepled. The mood in the room shifted subtly. There is, however, one non-negotiable condition for this partnership, she said, her voice dropping, losing its professional cadence and gaining something more personal, more dangerous. Charles Vance waved a dismissive hand. Name it. Equity, board seats. It's all on the table. It's not about equity, Lara said, her eyes sweeping across their faces, meeting each of their gazes in turn. It's about legacy. You see, I have a particular understanding of how this family treats those it deems unworthy. A flicker of confusion went around the table. I knew a woman once, she continued, her tone conversational, yet laced with steel. A woman this family cast out because she married for love instead of profit. She was given a pittance and told her child a little girl was not part of this family's legacy. That girl was left with nothing but the sound of a door closing in her face. The confusion on Charles's face began to curdle into dawning horror. He was staring at her, really looking at her now, past the power suit and the aura of success, searching for the ghost in the features before him. That little girl watched her mother work herself into an early grave, Lara went on, her voice still quiet, but now filling every corner of the silent room. She lived with the constant shadow of your dismissal, but she made a promise. She promised she would never need you, and she never did. She picked up her tablet, tapped the screen, and the massive monitor at the end of the boardroom lit up. It did not show a financial chart. It showed the faded, beloved photograph of her mother, Lillian, smiling. My name, Lara said, the words falling like stones, is Lara Vance. My mother was Lillian. You left us for dead. But life has a funny way of balancing the scales. For 11 years, I have built my empire in silence. And now, life has made you watch my rise. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sharp intake of her Uncle Robert's breath. Charles had gone ashen, his hands trembling on the table. Her cousins were staring, their mouths agape, the reality of their savior's identity crashing down upon them. The condition, Lara stated, standing up, her presence now dominating the room, is that you will all tender your resignations. Today, you will walk away from the company you cherished above your own family. You will know what it is to have your legacy, the only thing you ever truly cared about, hand it to someone you deemed nothing. The Ethelgard merger will proceed, but it will be run by my team. Your name will remain on the building, but your influence is over. She looked at the portrait of her grandfather, his cold eyes staring down from the wall. You told me I was not of your legacy. You were right. I am my mother's legacy, and it is far greater than anything you could ever have built. She turned and walked toward the door, leaving them in the ruins of their own privilege. She did not look back. She had not raised her voice. She had not shed a tear. She had simply stated the facts and imposed her justice. She had won. She had reclaimed everything. But as she stepped out into the sunlight, the victory felt hollow. The little girl in the hand-me-down dress was finally avenged, but she could never get her mother back. The justice was complete, but the cost was etched permanently on her soul. They had been forced to watch her rise, and she was now condemned to live in the silent, lonely palace of her triumph. If this story gave you chills or made you feel the power of justice, don't forget to engage. Comment Justice 1 if you believe no pain goes unanswered. If you believe revenge isn't cruelty but justice for the broken, like, comment, share, and subscribe to Silent Revenge.